Okay, that should work a lot better. Can you hear me now? Are you okay in hearing me now? Good, okay. Something about this computer, it decides that it wants to mute me sometimes. Okay, so here we are. Um, Good. All right, so we have several questions that we can ask, and then again, if you have other questions that you would like to ask, please feel free. Very good. Okay, thank you. All right, so the first one that I want to address, let's see. Let's do this one. Okay, so Father, you said that we do not do prostrations now. Why? Okay. Why do you want to? I guess that's the first question I would ask. Because what we are living in right now is the Paschal season. And the Paschal season is a time of light and of brightness and of joy. There's no fasting for 40 days. In our archdiocese, it actually runs from Pascha all the way to Ascension. Now, the day of Ascension, we actually do go back to our normal fasting and feasting schedule. So the entire time of Pascha in our tradition, we don't fast. Okay? It's the same with kneeling. In our tradition, actually, kneeling goes all the way from Pascha to Pentecost. We don't kneel. And partly because God has elevated us. He has lifted us up from our unworthiness. Now, it's not anything that we have done. It's not that we've finally, graduated from being disciples now and have the opportunity to become something better. It's because He lifts us up. Okay, He is the one who sees that we're infinitely worthy, and He's the one who wants us to be saved more than we know. Okay, more than we really want to be saved ourselves. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but it's true. He desires for us to be with Him. If God were capable of human emotions, that's the closest thing I would say to it. His divine dispensation, His whole willingness to do that, okay, is that's why we don't kneel, because we're lifted up, we're made worthy. Okay, and a little interesting point. A lot of the penitential things in our tradition, especially the process of kneeling during things like the Lord's Prayer, and sometimes people be inclined to kneel, and other times during the service. To be honest with you, during a liturgical service, there really is no occasion to kneel at all, especially on a Sunday. You should never, ever, ever kneel on a Sunday. The closest you would get to that is kneeling today, and if you notice, no one knelt. Well, I mean, I didn't kneel. You're not going to notice anyone else, but there is no kneeling during Sunday services, because each Sunday service is a Paschal celebration. It's a celebration of Pascha, no kneeling. So traditionally, we could kneel during the week if we had a service. Like if we do a service for St. Elias on July 20th, then yes, kneeling is appropriate. If we do the Soul Saturday services, of course, kneeling is appropriate. Our pre-sanctified divine liturgies, kneeling is appropriate. But those are aside from St. Elias, those are times of Lent when, prostrations and kneeling have a much more central thing in our lives than normal. But no kneeling, okay? And actually, in our church, there really shouldn't be any sitting either. I don't know when pews came in. I'm going to blame the Catholics again. No offense to any Catholics out there, but that was not a practice either. We didn't have pews in our churches for a very, very, very long time. And it was really an American innovation. You come to America, everyone's got pews, so you have pews. But you go to certain Orthodox churches, especially these new convert parishes where they build their churches from, cement foundations upward. You walk in, there are no pews. If you go to that massive church in St. Andrews in Riverside, California, they have pews, but they only line the walls, and everything in the center is open. And that's intentional. that the pews are not supposed to be there. So you're supposed to be standing for the whole service. Now, I'm sure we would get a lot of complaining if that were the case with us, but it's not a bad thing. So definitely no kneeling, though. Kneeling is a sign of penance and it goes beyond humility. It's not humility. It's deeper, and so that is the major reason why we don't kneel during this season of Pascha, because he's lifted us up. He saved us from our sinfulness, and he saved us from death, which are the two things that we have to wrestle with in varying degrees. And so we stand as is appropriate. Okay. And I don't know if you noticed, but I was reminded by a priest when I did a visit out in Ohio a couple years ago now. The priest reminded me that I'm not supposed to kneel during the liturgy ever, with the exception, again, like I said, of a non-Sunday liturgy. So that's why I haven't knelt after the consecration of the gifts. So, okay. So that's why we don't kneel. If you want me to answer a follow-up question, please feel free to write back or text me and let me know. Thank you. Okay. This one's an interesting question. If someone believes in God but has never been baptized, will they go to heaven? I just had a parishioner talk to me about this because there's somebody that person knows that insists that Jews and Muslims are going to hell. Wow. I don't share that opinion, at least not in any kind of definitive way. I think that's a little judgmental, which is something that we're not supposed to be. But if you look very carefully in the epistle to the Romans, St. Paul talks at certain points about how the gospel is there for us to follow, and those who hear it and follow are blessed, and those who hear it and do not follow are destined for judgment. That's what St. Paul says. Now, bear in mind what was just said. If they have heard the gospel. Now, the gospel isn't, hey, friend, let me come up and tell you about my friend Jesus Christ. It's not that, okay? It's living into the true gospel. Have they been catechized? Have they been exemplars? Have they had role models in their lives that are Christian and have taught them along the way? I'll talk a little bit about catechesis here in a second, okay? But for the rest, if they haven't heard the gospel, what do? Well, St. Paul says that there are some who live in the world where the gospel is written on their hearts, okay? So to have the gospel written on their hearts means that just by their nature, they do things and they say things and they live in a way that is well-pleasing to God, okay? Their fruit is indeed the fruit of someone that would be a follower of God. The gospel is written on their hearts. So these people, having never been baptized, having never really been catechized or anything like that, they are destined for the kingdom of God because they live in a way that is well-pleasing to God, okay? So the quick answer to that is, again, we are nobody's judge, but we can just base our suppositions based on the evidence that we have in front of us. And so because of what Romans says, we can rest assured that there are people who are not called Christians today, or certainly not called Orthodox today, that will be in the kingdom of heaven, okay? Think of it this way. The thief on the cross, all he did is gave a testimony, okay? He didn't say, he didn't say, I'm a Bible believing anything, I accept the Torah. He didn't say any of that stuff. He instead just simply said, remember me when you go into your kingdom. And Jesus said, today you'll be in paradise with me. So we know that it's not just a matter of the process. But I want to say two things. The first is about catechism. The catechism, the Greek word literally means to echo, okay? So I'll give you an example. And in fact, it's an exact example. When Um, when we do a baptism, okay, there are times when it is appropriate for the priest to say a line, and then the person responds back with the exact same line. And we can do that with the Nicene Creed. Usually I just have them read it. But one of the ways, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to do this, is to have the person who's being brought into the church, or godparents if the child is too young to speak, and just have them recite what I say. I believe in one God. And the person would say back, I believe in one God, and go backward and back and back and back as an echo. Okay, because that's exactly what catechesis is. So here are the mysteries of the faith. And basically the expectation would be that the statements that would come out of the person's mouth would be exactly the same statements that came out of the person who was teaching, in this case, mine. So catechism is the process of learning about the mysteries of the faith. Okay, but that's a two-edged sword, because there is the faith that is apprehended, and then there is the faith that is acted. And it's important to have both. Okay. Once you become Orthodox, great. You have a lot of knowledge. That's fantastic. And, I'll be honest, looking back, I've been in the faith. I was catechized by an excellent priest, Father Dennis Buck, in Hagerstown, Maryland, a man of very great compassion and intelligence. And gosh, I wish you were watching right now. But anyway, Father Dennis taught me a lot. And, so when I was brought into the church in whenever that was, 94, I walked in thinking I knew a lot. Well, I can tell you, looking back, I can say I didn't know anything. It takes a long time to learn the mysteries of the faith, and it takes a long time to live it out in a way that is authentic and not impractical, and there is a problem. You don't see it so much in our church, but you do see it in other churches. I call it convertitis, where someone walks in having read all these books and learned all about the different things and heard all the right ancient faith articles and all of that. And they come in and someone does something and they immediately say, well, that's not Orthodox. We don't do that. Well, and they're yelling at a 90-year-old woman who's lived in an Orthodox church her whole life. You have to be careful with that kind of stuff, obviously. And I realize that's an exaggeration, but we do have to be careful. Those who have been in the church all their lives need to have the humility and the compassion to realize that no one knows everything. Only God knows everything. And so there are times when people walk in and they may have something to say that everyone needs to listen to. And then converts on the other side need to realize that these people who have been in the church their whole lives, the cradles, we would call them, the cradles also have things to teach those who think they know everything. Okay? Because orthodoxy is a way of life. It's a way of bringing out the beauty of God into the world. Okay, it's not just it's not a denomination as other denominations would be understood. It's not a competing storefront that is looking for market share. That's not who we are. Who we are is a collection of Christians who worship God as purely and as beautifully as we possibly can. We do that through a practice of learning, but also through a practice of bearing fruit. And we bear fruit in all sorts of different ways. We take care of our neighbor, for one thing, but we also bear witness to Christ in everything that we do, everything. So it's, whether you're on Route 79 driving to Pittsburgh or you're in Save-A-Lot trying to, wind your way through the aisles or wherever it may be, someone needs to look at you and say, you're a Christian. I can tell. Because there's a beauty in what we do when we do it right. Okay. And to be honest, when we do it wrong, it's actually kind of ugly. So these are things to be mindful of. And we need to have the humility to go back to this person's question. We need to have the humility to understand that there are times when there is somebody who is not baptized and they show us the way. There's a statement in the Epistle to the Hebrews that says that you're to entertain everyone who comes your way as if they were brought to you by Christ. Because some of those that you may be caring for may be angels in disguise. That's a very, very good way of looking at things. Okay, so having the humility to understand, yes, we worship God as best as we possibly can, and we have the equipment, and actually, I'm going to write that down. We have the equipment if we take a look at the depth of our faith, we have the equipment necessary to cope with any kind of situation that comes our way. That's part of what it means to be Orthodox, okay? Look back in history, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But we need to study this equipment, and we need to learn about it, and we need to practice with it, and we need to use it, okay? And so all of that is an important part of who we are. And that's why it is important to be baptized, because, by being baptized, you're brought into a community of faith. You're given the Eucharist. You're open to all these different sacraments that will help you and nourish you and sustain you and guide you. Okay. And so it's not like we should just say, well, just go and do what you want. Who cares? We should care enough that we want everyone to be baptized, because we want everyone to be a participant in this community, this beautiful community of faith. Okay, especially ours. Ours is awesome, right? And so you want to have people involved and receive the love and the light and the life that comes from a life in faith. Okay, but we're not here to say, okay, well, we, the God-fearing members of St. Elias Antiochian Orthodox Church, know that we're going to heaven, and we also know that those who don't worship at all aren't going anywhere. We can't say that. Okay, we just can't. And if you think we can, come talk to me. Well, when social distancing's over, I'll help you out. So that's a very long and protracted answer to that question. But it's important for us, I think, to keep in a position where we understand, as Orthodox Christians, we have a way of life. And that way of life is beautiful and healthy and life-sustaining and life-affirming. And one more thing to add to that, and that is Christ reminds us, to whom much is given, much is expected. Okay, and I've said this before in my classes. Thank you. I've said this before in my classes that we need to remember as Orthodox Christians that we don't have, we're not going to get off easy, because we have everything. We have everything that we possibly need. Okay, there's nothing that can be added to us. We can be reminded by people on the outside that there are certain things that we should be doing that we're not. For example, this is a sidebar, but John Wesley was a Protestant pastor. He was actually Anglican. He lived in England, and he grew concerned because the church that he was a part of was much more interested in the fanciness of their worship services than in taking care of the coal miners in the hills. And so he dedicated his life, and he dedicated his way of practicing and towards taking care of the other. Okay, now that has been a theme song for the Methodist Church, for ever since it was founded by him. Now, I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not their judge, and that's not my concern. But I will tell you that their dedication to the people around them, their willingness to be missionaries, their willingness to sacrifice time and talent to go, when I was a Methodist when I was growing up, and I remember in '86, we went to Parsons, West Virginia, and we helped to put a town back together. And actually my church was responsible for collecting truckloads upon truckloads of cars. The car carriers would be parked in our parking lots, and they would drive these cars to Parsons, West Virginia, because all the cars were destroyed. So it was really a remarkable thing. It actually made the news in the Washington, D.C. area. And I'm not here to compliment them. I'm not here to say that they're better than us, but they remind us that there are obligations that we have that we could be doing to help, to bring a broader perspective of who we are as Christians. To put it more into a historical viewpoint, St. Basil's communities would dedicate their lives to taking care of sick people. He's basically, I mean, you can argue me on this point, but he's basically responsible for setting up the hospitals that we have today. He would have monastics, nuns, learn the medical arts and learn how to take care of the sick people. And they would put the hospitals on the fringes of the city, okay? Not in the center like they are now, but in the fringes and the outskirts. And those people would dedicate, the nurses and the doctors, so-called back then, would dedicate their lives to caring for the sick and the infirm and the elderly and all of that. Okay, that's how they dedicated their lives, and it increased the quality of life of the people who lived there. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, you know. And there are ways that we look outside of ourselves when we have the appropriate humility necessary to realize, you know what they're doing? They're teaching us, and that's okay. We deserve to be taught. You know, we're not perfect, and if you think we are, well, God is perfect. And those who think they are perfect are going to meet God one day, and they're going to realize just how perfect they really are. So God help us. All right. So that's question number 2. Question number 3. In thy wisdom. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So this person had written a larger note to me, and I just took the question right out of it, I see. But the question is this. It has to do with the idea of God's judgment and the stuff that we're enduring right now. In that we are enduring this separation, and basically the world's like more or less come to a halt. Although you won't believe that again if you're out on, you know, our favorite 79. So there is a prayer that is up on the website of the Antiochian Archdiocese. And that prayer reads something like this. In thy wisdom, take care of our lives. Hear our prayers. Accept our repentance for our sins and stop this rampant pandemic in the same way that thou didst stop punishing thy people in the days of David the king. So the question is this. Could what's happening now be a punishment from God? Air pollution is down, and the waters are clearing themselves in some areas. It seems the world is trying to heal itself from all that's been done to it. Okay, that's a good question. I would suggest that we take a look at this in a number of ways. I mean, your nature is amazing. It really is, and it's tireless. Okay, I'll give you, forgive the pun, but a concrete example. When you have a sidewalk that isn't used, when people aren't walking on this sidewalk, and say it just gets abandoned. I'm sure there are some around here. There's probably some back behind the church somewhere. When nature becomes aware through various means that people aren't walking there, and then weeds will grow. And eventually, not just weeds, but flowers, bushes, trees, they will grow and they will overrun what was there, okay? And they'll do just fine. And eventually, either the mighty trees will pulverize the sidewalk into just regular rock, or it'll just be overgrown. And that's just a fact of life. That's just one of the ways that nature works. I'm utterly fascinated, and maybe someone can help me. And this is a complete aside, so forgive me. But I know if you drive on Maitland to the east of the city, okay, you're going to cross over a creek. And I can't remember if that's, I don't know, that creek, though, I'm sure it runs to Valant. The creek does. But at that bridge at Maitland, as you're crossing over that creek, there is very obviously an old railroad bridge. Okay, and I'm utterly fascinated by that rail line. So if someone can tell me what that rail line was, I would love to hear about it, because I'd love to study its history a little bit. But if you go up and down across that creek or river, whatever it is, at various points, you can still see some evidence that railroad used to exist. And there's actually there's a certain place where you can see a train station. It's right there in the middle of nothing. It's a house now, I think. And there's a road that runs in front of it. But there's very obviously, it used to be a rail line was there, and it's not there anymore. So I'm fascinated by that. And part of why I am is because it shows It shows that even our efforts come and go. Okay. And that's part of what I think I want to answer this question with. Okay. The person who's asking the question is asking really kind of a twofold question, I think, if I understand it correctly. The first one is this thing, the pandemic, is it God's wrath? And the second is it really God's wrath because things are getting better? Okay. Well, here's the thing. We are fallen as people. Okay. We are fallen. We have a tendency to seek after our own self-interests, and we don't think about the ramifications of some of the things that we do sometimes. I think we tend to look out after our own pleasures and look after our own desires, and we tend to see the world around us as a resource as opposed to something that we're supposed to work alongside of. And that may be good, it may be bad. I mean, God did tell us to have dominion over the earth, to subdue it, in fact, and to a greater or lesser degree we have, because here I sit in a house with light, heat, and shelter, so that I don't get wet and cold and miserable. So we have done some effort to subdue, but maybe sometimes we do things to too great a way of subduing. I can think of a very, very explicit example. If you're driving again on the interstates, this time on Route 70, heading northwest out of the Washington, D.C. area and heading very close to the Pennsylvania border, if you look out into the distance, you can see that humans have taken a mountain and cut a notch out of it, a huge V like this, okay? And the road, Route 68, runs right in the middle of that V, okay? And that didn't used to exist. When I was in high school, that didn't exist. They blew up that mountain so they could put a road through it. Okay, well, great. So now we have a great road that runs from Hancock, Maryland, all the way to just below Morgantown, West Virginia. It's another way that people can go west and not have to bother with the Pennsylvania Turnpike and yada, yada, yada. But it's also changed the weather patterns in Hancock, Maryland. They didn't expect that. They had no clue. But because the wind can rush through there, it changes all sorts of things, right? And so we don't realize the collateral damage that is caused through some of our activity. So all of that is to say, is this God's judgment? I don't think so. But I also think it does serve as a reminder that we are not God. Okay, we are not masters of the world, and we never will be, because we personally will never, ever, ever be able to cheat death. Okay, death will always come. And I hate to sound so morbid, and it's true, it is morbid, but death will always come. It will. And there's nothing we can do about it except be ready for it and to embrace it, not run to it, but embrace it as an entryway into life eternal with God. And so that means we have to do the things that are well-pleasing to God in order to get there, okay? But this tendency that we have to think that we should be in control, that's a gigantic mistake. We should never, ever, ever think that just by being a Christian or by being an American or being strong or being any of that stuff is enough to be in control, okay? Epidemics and pandemics like this remind us that control is beyond our grasp. And we need to learn how to live with that and accept it. Okay, that's very important. And that's going to bring me back to that point that I want to make at the end of this, because I have a little bit of a lecture to give. But the pandemic itself needs to just be a reminder of how I don't want to say delicate, because that gives the implication that it's something that needs to be taken care of. It's not that. It's not futile either. I don't want to be so negative, but it's somewhere in the middle. We live in a fragile system. We live in a fragile economic system. Our world is fragile. It's amazing. Just a shift of 5 or 10 degrees one way or the other, and our whole way of life changes. Okay, we talk now about climate change, and it used to be called global warming and things like that. Okay, whether it happens or not, the bottom line is it's going to change the way that we live if it does happen the way that we think it's going to happen. And so we do need to do things that are more responsible. Okay. And getting back to what I said before, Christians are supposed to be stewards of the world, not abusers of it. Okay. So God gave us these gifts, but that doesn't mean we take the gift and create something that's dangerous or deadly with it. Okay. That's irresponsible. And that's a sign of the fall. So we need to be careful and need to remember to live in harmony with it. And so getting to the second point of the question, that waters are starting to clean and the pollution's going down. Okay, it's true, but that's nature's normal state. And if we live in nature's normal state, those things are not going to be like that. Okay, so does that mean, Father, that you want me to get rid of my car? Well, I don't think that's reasonable. Okay, any more than getting rid of other things is reasonable. But what we do need to do is remember that those things come at a cost. And if by our activity we are causing harm to others or our future generations or whatever, then we have some repenting to do. And this is a perfect time to consider these things. Yes, now at this point I sound like the Patriarch of Constantinople, but I think it's important for us to remember that our lives are supposed to be lived in harmony with our surroundings because God did create it. Okay, now let me give the backlash to the question that was asked. Okay, it's true that pollution is going away, and it's true that the waters, more or less in certain areas, are getting cleaner. But it's also true that in this time of pandemic, we have had tornadoes like we have never seen before. Okay, took out a big chunk of Nashville a couple weeks ago. I have a friend who's a priest down in Mississippi, and he was telling me that there's whole chunks of his town that are without power for days upon days because an EF2, the worst tornadoes are EF5, so an EF2 came through and it decimated, the electrical supply lines of that particular part of the town. And so, we are still going to be in a position where nature is going to be nature. There are still earthquakes, there are still floods, there are still fires. Those things are going to happen, and those things are going to continue to happen. And so what do we need to do? We need to be ready, okay? We need to just be ready and remember who we are and do the things that are appropriate and right in order to keep going and doing what we need to do. Do we need the excess that we practice? Probably not, and we'll have to find a way to atone for that. Because, as Americans, that to whom much is given, much is expected thing, as Americans, we should be doing more for the people around us. There's just no other way to look at it. We have abundant resources. We have food. We actually pay farmers not to grow crops now, which is just, to me, that's murderous. When you have entire populations in places like Sudan or Ethiopia or wherever starving, even Appalachia in some parts, for crying out loud, and you're not growing the food to help them, that's problematic. It's borderline evil. So we need to be careful about that. Okay, enough of the political discussion. So another question that I have here is a question about forgiveness. So we're going to return to that question that we had last week. So can you forgive a person for wrongdoing without saying it in person, in a case where the person doesn't even think that they've wronged you? Okay, well, that's a good question, okay? But it really doesn't deal with the issue at hand. The issue at hand is that forgiveness is on you, not on them, okay? And so if someone has wronged you and you're justified in being offended and hurt, and that person is oblivious, your job is just to forgive them, okay? Your job is just to forgive them, and that's it, okay? You don't have to tell them. And in fact, sometimes telling them is worse than not telling them. Because, imagine me walking up to somebody and saying, you said something really, really mean to me last week, right after church, when we were sitting there just gabbing. You said something really nasty, but I want you to know I forgive you. What would that do? I think they would be, well, first of all, then their minds would just scramble. Okay, what did I say? What did I do? But there's also a level of presumption in all of that I forgave you, and you did something wrong. Shame on you. You've got work to do. Now I've done my part. I've forgiven you. Now you need to go do your part. And I don't mean to say that that's what's being asked in this question. Okay. What I'm trying to tell you is that forgiveness is on the part of you. Okay. Reconciliation is a different matter, but if you forgive, then by and large, you're willing to be reconciled. Okay. Now, I actually, going back on what I said last week, actually, to tell you the truth, that's the first time I had ever thought about that, about the forgiving and forgetting. And that as long as the forgetting doesn't cause you, the not forgetting doesn't cause you to sin, then fine. But if it does, then you need to do more. It's the same kind with this, okay? Your forgiveness will be known by the fruits that you bear, all right? It goes back to that again. So if you forgive the person, whatever it is that they've done, and then you go and you treat them as if the slate is wiped clean, you treat them fairly, honestly, like a Christian would treat somebody, respectfully and with compassion, then that's all that needs to be done. You don't need to inform them, you offended me and I forgave you. They don't need to know that. That's all on you. And so, basically the forgiveness will be manifest again in the way that you behave towards that other person. And that's all that really matters. Okay. And especially if the person has no clue, if they go and hurt you again, then you need to modify the way that you deal with the person so that you're not put in a position where you get hurt. Okay. And that's an important thing too. I mean, we're not here to willfully we willfully will walk towards our martyrdom. Okay. But if we have somebody who continually hurts us over and over and over again, that's not martyrdom. That's something else. Okay. And so we need to make sure in the midst of everything that we do that we're not just inviting ourselves up for more punishment. Okay. Because we're better than that. We deserve better than that. Right. And I can think of all sorts of different people that I should say that to. So hopefully most of you are listening to that. But it's important for us not to hold someone's transgressions in a way that it puts them in a position of weakness or deficit. Okay. Our job is to forgive and move on, because we've got to make sure that the state of our soul is pure and clean enough that we can go and do the things that show God that we love him. Okay. And if we're living in a time of resentment and anger and wishing malicious things and just wanting to cause hurt to people, it's so barren. It's dead. It's the fruit tree that Christ looks at, sees that it has no fruit, and it withers and it dies. That would be our spiritual life if we let those things fester. So you've got to let them go. But you do it for you. You don't do it for the person that hurt you. That's not your problem. That's their problem. And trust me, if they're going and hurting you and then going and hurting another person, they have more to worry about than you ever have to worry about with them. Okay? And I also don't recommend saying, you really hurt me and I forgave you, and I'm doing this to tell you, look, you've got to fix this. You're going to hurt other people. Leave it alone. Okay? That's not your job. A lot of times we have people who want to fix behaviors in other people. That's pointless. Okay? I get it. Back in the old days, people used to, correct people for stuff that they did wrong. We don't live in that time right now. If I'm going to say something, I will say something. As the spiritual father of St. Elias, I will say something. But in a situation like that, it's best to just let things go and just let things unfold. You would not believe how many times I've had experiences where I wanted to say something. I felt the urge and I knew that I was right in saying something. But then I was like, I'm not sure on the short term that this is going to be helpful to the person who's talking. So I keep my mouth shut. And lo and behold, in doing that and just giving it to God, going and lighting a candle and saying, Lord, help me. And at the same time, help that person, be merciful, show your mercy on them. And then, justice works out in God's terms, not in ours. And I'll tell you, justice in God's terms is infinitely better than justice in our terms. Okay. So just do what you have to do to be at peace. Do what you have to do where you can breathe without feeling some kind of animosity or anger or malice towards someone else. Okay, your job when you think of the person who hurt you, okay, you make the sign of the cross. You remember things that are good and true and beautiful about them, and then you pray for their well-being. Okay, if you can get to that point, all right, you're fine. Okay, yeah, it takes work. Okay, but Christians, we're not about doing things easy, right? Okay, so that's the answer to that question. So let me see if I have any other questions. I don't think so. Okay, so like I said, if you do have questions, or if you need me to follow up on anything that I've said to this point, please do send me either a text or write a note in the live chat. And the way I figure out the live chat, I'm about a minute behind. So I see your notes about a minute after you wrote them. So it won't be real time. It will be sort of delayed time. But what I want to talk about until I do get more questions is this concept of equipment. Okay. I want you to think about our faith. Okay. And I want you to think about it in terms of what we are experiencing right now and what we have just been through Lent. Okay. What we are experiencing right now is deprivation. All right. We are being deprived. Well, I'm not being deprived. The two subdeacons are not being deprived. Well, we are, but not of what I'm about to talk about. And what that is the Eucharist. Okay. Because of social distancing and because of the rules imposed, we are in a position right now where I cannot commune people. It's hard for me to do hospital visits and things like that also. Okay. So we're being deprived and it's hard. Okay. It causes stress and anxiety. Okay. I want you to think though, while we're talking about other churches, if we were part of that, any Protestant church that doesn't on a Sunday practice the Eucharist, doesn't offer the Eucharist, there's not a whole lot of difference between what they're experiencing live stream than what they're experiencing in the church, except they're smushed together in an auditorium or in a church. Okay. So they're not missing out on a whole lot. We are, because our faith is not just one of visuals and audio. It's also a faith of smelling the incense. And it's also a visual of tasting and seeing and feeling. All of these things are part of who we are. Our liturgical experience encompasses every aspect of our being. Okay, so it's not just a show. It's not, so it's a show while we're live streaming it. You're seeing it through the camera when it works, and you're having opportunities to hear the prayers that would be said, and normally you'd be there. And so we have that. And so there is a yearning that gets us to want to be a part of that. But before that, though, we just went through 50 some days of Lent, right? Because we had the time of Lent itself, and then we had Holy Week when we were practicing fasting throughout all of that. Okay, but we were also learning skills while that was happening. We're learning that our stomachs aren't our masters. Okay, so we can go and we can eat the things that we're supposed to eat. We're going to eat dried banana chips instead of, a banana milkshake. We're going to do things that are better for our bodies. Not going to eat a sumptuous steak every other day. Instead, we're going to eat peanut butter or something along those lines, legumes or something. We're going to find ways to hone our desires, to tell our stomachs and to tell our appetites that they are not our masters. And when we were able to do that, then we get a little bit of equipment to cope and to deal with the things that are surrounding us. Okay, so we have that. We also have times of intensified prayer. We have services during the week, and we also have services and things that we're supposed to be doing at home. We're supposed to be saying the prayer of St. Ephrem every day. We're supposed to be, looking at the Old Testament readings. We're supposed to be, doing all sorts of things that bring us closer to God. Okay. And part of that is, we're depriving ourselves of creature comforts and things that we're used to having on a common, everyday type of thing. Okay, so the Lenten season prepares us to deal with even more deprivation, and it gives us strength necessary to endure in seasons when we can't do the things that we want, but instead have to do what someone else imposes on us. Okay, which brings me to part 3. Part 3 is obedience itself. In the church, you are not supposed to eat anything with a backbone. No milk products, no wine, no olive oil. Okay? When you say that, it's like, well, why? Okay, well, in our church, I try to tell you why. I don't know if you noticed that, but I do. But in our church, the why is irrelevant. Just do it. Okay? Why? Well, no, that's not your question. Just do it. And I know that sounds horrible, right? Especially to us Americans. We hate the idea of being told that we have to do something. Okay? But bottom line is, our church is a church of obedience. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. What are the commandments? Go read Matthew 5 through 7. That's a good primer. Okay? If you can do Matthew 5 through 7 from the beginning to the end, and you can say every single thing that's in there, I have kept from my youth up, you're well on your way to the kingdom of heaven. Okay? But by loving Christ and keeping his commandments, you are being obedient to God and loving him as he expects you to love him. Okay, but that obedience does go into other things, including our fasting, including listening to the government when we'd rather be out with our friends and doing things that we like to do and having a normal life and things like that. We're not in a situation where those things are dangerous to a certain degree. Okay, because we risk the lives of others in doing those things. And that's another rule in our faith. You don't do that. You do not put yourself in a position where your activity might put someone else's life at risk. You just don't do it. Okay? Your life, fine. But even there, like I said earlier, you don't want to just turn yourself into a martyr. You want to put yourself in a position where you're doing the things that are pleasing to God. And if by a side effect something happens where you go to the next life, that's fine. It's a side effect. It's an unintended consequence. Okay? But you don't run to it. But you also don't put it into a position where your activity is going to cause someone else to get hurt. Okay? That's what's so important about this. Unintended consequences. When you may be well, but maybe not, and you go out and you expose others, what would happen if you went out, say, to Giant Eagle, and through some accident you managed to come in contact with 10 people? What would happen if you knowingly thought, well, I don't feel great, but I still need to go to the store, so you went. And then as a result of you going, 3 people die. How would you feel? Probably horrible. At least I hope you would. Now, we'll never know because the way that things are in HIPAA and everything else, we don't know if we're the carrier or not. But that's part of why this is so important. It's important so that we realize just how our actions have consequences. And that's why when I see groups gathered or I see people not wearing their masks right, I get kind of sad, because we're not ready for that yet. The time will come, but it's not now. All right, we'll get there, just not now. So our Metropolitan will be sending out this week a message about all of this, and he will start putting into place an easing into our normal way of life. And I'm sure a lot of it will have to do with what the local governments stipulate. And in our case, it's my understanding, I haven't read them yet. I just think it's still too soon. But in our case, I think what's going to happen is we'll probably be one of the last groups that's allowed to go back to normal because everyone's gathered in one place. Okay. So, we still need to continue to do the things that we are doing. And let me add another thing to this. Okay. I am very concerned culturally, and I realize it's a bit of a rant, but I'm sorry. Culturally, I think we tend to define ourselves by what we do. I think that is very, very dangerous. And I also think it's wrong. We define our value on whether or not we can provide value to some greater thing. Okay, that's not what this is about. All right, our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, look at the life that he chose to live. We look at him as the singular most important human being in the entire history of the world. but he came as a carpenter's son. Okay. Carpenters didn't make a whole lot of money. And carpenters, well, I mean, they were only as good as their products. He didn't come in as Herod's son. He didn't come in as Caesar's son. He didn't come in as Aristotle's son, although Aristotle didn't live at that age. I'm just saying, a wealthy teacher. He didn't come in any way like that. He came in poor, dirt poor, so poor that when it came time to make a sacrifice for Mary in the birth of Jesus, they had to offer 2 turtle doves and not the proper offering of a blemishless calf or lamb. Okay, they were poor. And so we know by just looking at that whatever the world values in terms of human existence, Christ is turning on its head. Okay, and throughout his ministry, he had nowhere to set his head. He roved. He ate with sinners and tax collectors. He did all of those kinds of things. There's nothing in the Gospels, there's nothing anywhere in the Bible that says that you are going to be judged by the quality of your, labor. Not in that sense, okay? You're going to be known by the quality of your labor. You're known by your fruits, okay? But I see that as a decidedly different thing. The fruits are an expression of your personality. They're not an expression of trying to sustain a lifestyle, okay? So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I think as a culture, we tend to overemphasize our activity and we don't reflect enough. We need to be more in a life of contemplation and prayer and less in a life where we're like, oh my gosh, I am so bored. I need to go do something. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to read Ecclesiastes, okay? And so we will make Ecclesiastes part of our Bible study that we do as we continue. As things are right now, I'm not going to do it twice a week. I will have something else in store for us on the off days of the week. So we are going to continue with Sunday and Thursday for this foreseeable future. On Thursday night, we will have a Bible study, and we will start with Ecclesiastes. On Sunday night, we will either have Q&A or we will talk about some various aspects of our worship. We are Orthodox, and therefore it is good to know about the things that we do as worshipers, okay? So I'm going to start a short primer, thanks to the suggestion of one of you, on the services of Vespers, Orthros, and Liturgy. We'll talk about their structures. I'll read some of the prayers that are found in them. And to make it specifically useful, I'm starting to have second thoughts. To make it specifically useful, we're going to take a look at the upcoming week's services so that we can follow along. And I will show you what is a standard thing, what's abnormal, and the prayers that are added in every week. And I just changed my mind since this is live. I apologize. But Thursdays are when we will have the Q&A and the discussion on Vespers, Orthros, and Liturgy. That way on Thursday, we can be exposed to what's coming on Sunday and then be ready for Sunday when it comes. And I'll even show you locations where you can get these documents in advance so that you can follow along. It's very, very simple. And then on Sunday night, starting with next week, we will begin with Ecclesiastes as a Bible study. And we won't dwell on Ecclesiastes. We will we'll go to other books of the Bible or maybe look at a text from a church father at some point. Maybe the writings of St. Ignatius or something. Okay, but basically what I want us to do is, this is my time with you. Some things that I say are matters of opinion, of course, but I want you to learn and grow. And my ultimate goal in all of this is to give us a sense of sustenance, but also to help you learn to develop the skills necessary to endure, lousy times like this or other things that happen in the world. Orthodoxy, to wrap up, Orthodoxy is so resilient. I think back to the time of St. Ignatius of Antioch. He wrote all of his letters, and he wrote a lot of them. He wrote them all as he was making his journey from his episcopal seat in Antioch, which is where we're from, all the way to Rome. Okay, so the whole time he's being taken to Rome so that he can be executed. And he's writing these letters to admonish the churches and to strengthen and encourage them. and to help remind them of their lofty tasks. And I mean, it's really beautiful. Okay. But you know, it's one that shows a tremendous amount of resilience. Okay. He could have just recanted. He could have just said, you know what, I give up. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't do this. I'm done. And they would have spared him, but he refused. Okay. And then you go further on in the persecutions after persecutions. And then you take a look at our time in Syria. Once Syria fell to Islam, you know, it was difficult, but they still found ways to endure. In fact, to the point where, you know, St. John of Damascus was a trusted member of the Caliph's council. You know, I mean, how awesome is that? And that's how we do it. We learn to persevere. We have the skills necessary in order to endure. And then, of course, you can take a look at the time under communism, and you can see again, you know, the mothers would have icons on one side of their paintings, and they would have, you know, pastoral scenes, you know, drawn on the other side. And when it was time for worship, you would flip around and there'd be the icon. And when it was time for worship, you flip it back and there's a picture, you know, and, you know, story after story of the testimonies of faith that people had during these times of trial, you know, and it's all because of the depth of their faith. It's all because they practice an asceticism that brings them closer to God. And they study and they memorize. They memorize the liturgy. They memorize the Psalms. They memorize the prayers of the church. They remember the Jesus prayer. They do all of these things to help nourish and sustain their souls so that when times of difficulty come, they're ready and they're able to handle these times of trial. You know, I mean, what we're going through right now, my brothers and sisters, please, you need to see this as an opportunity. You see this as a chance to grow your faith, to take time to do absolutely nothing and to stop defining yourself by what you do, but instead just learn to pray. Learn to be active in your soul. You know, memorize some of the hymns of the church. Read some of the hymns of the church. You know, there are all sorts of opportunities that we have to do these kinds of things, and that's what we should be doing. We should be availing ourselves to that so that we can be strong in these times and not weak. And not lament the fact that we have nothing to do, but instead know that through our time together in prayer with God, that we're being nourished and sustained and strengthened, you know, so that when we go back to the busy times of our life, and they will come, it's inevitable, but maybe we can do it with a different perspective. Maybe we can do it while we understand that our priority is God and love of God first, and then everything else will just sort of take care of itself. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that in all of the things that we do, we learn to develop and cultivate a sense of our Christian faith and how that can really help to nourish and sustain us during times of difficulty like this. I mean, to be honest with you, this is nothing. It's difficult, but it's by no means a situation where you know, we're you know, we're not like the you know, it's not like the Christians under communism by any means. So there we have it. We're at 8 o'clock. So I think that's enough for today. I thank you so much for being with me tonight. If you do have further questions or want to follow up, please let me know. In addition to that, if there are any kind of pastoral things you need, if you want to talk to me or reach out, I'm available anytime. So just let me know. I pray that God will strengthen and bless you. We will gather again on Thursday, and we'll start taking a look at some of the services of the church. And again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to either email me or text me or get in contact with me how you normally do. May God bless you and keep you. Christ is risen, and we'll see you soon. Thank you and good night.